progression continues to be kind of a big deal. So last week, I talked a lot about character progression and how MMORPGs these days advance your character. Yeah, I know it wasn't actually last week. Some stuff came up, I'm sorry. Basically, about how MMORPGs are structured to help you progress your character to a stronger state of being, and how this is intrinsically bound to the gameplay of an MMORPG. If you want this broken down into plain English, MMORPGs are designed to let you live the fantasy of being a badass. But there are two sides to the progression coin. There is character progression, and then we have content progression. What's the difference? Character progression means your character is getting stronger and more powerful throughout the game. Content progression is everything else getting stronger and more powerful to kick your ass. More accurately, if content is the challenge we face, content progression is how those challenges are arrayed against us. And like character progression, this is intrinsically bound up in the very core gameplay of most MMORPGs. You'd expect that as your character grows more powerful, so too should the challenges that your character is capable of defeating. So let's talk about how MMORPGs progress you through their world, through their dungeons, through their raids, through their most challenging moments. Content progression is a quest. Content progression is a dungeon, it's a reputation faction, it's a raid, it's everything that is there to move you forward. It's intrinsically bound to character progression in many ways. But while character progression is centered upon the character, content progression is centered upon the challenges that character must face. And they have to be designed in a very different way, though they can share a lot of concepts. As I mentioned in my last video, agency is a major part in character progression, and it is still a major part in content progression, for a very good reason. Agency is the empowering force of games. Agency is what makes games better than any other form of media in existence. They are arguably what makes games, really. But even above being able to choose how you progress through content, there's a lot of other things that content progression has to do, which are kind of essential to the MMORPG ethos, I guess. One big thing is motivating the player. Content progression should be the primary form of motivation for the player, because content progression leads directly to content rewards, like raid drops, all of that cool stuff, mounts, titles, the good stuff. As well, it provides much needed structure to how we approach a game. Now, the amount of structure a content progression system has will vary based on the MMORPG. Wildstar is way more structured than Black Desert Online, but they still have structures, regardless of if you're a sandbox or if you're a theme park. It's gotta be there. A good example of structure is how one raid leads into another. In Wildstar, you start in Genetic Archives, and then you move into Datascape, and now you'll be moving into the first wing of Red Moon, Tera. All of these raids are connected to each other, but they are also steps on the way to both improving your character and reaching the end of the content cycle, which encapsulates the entirety of a content structure for one game or expansion pack. And ideally, these content cycles lead into more content cycles with more content progression arcs, which could ideally kind of go on forever, which is kind of how the MMORPG business model is designed, but most often go for a few expansions and then kind of peter out or go free to play or something, unless you're World of Warcraft, where apparently you're just immortal. If 3 content droughts in excess of 10 months each can't kill you, I don't know anything short of a stake to the heart that will. So let's talk about these 3 concepts when it comes to MMORPG content structure. First, we've got agency, then we've got motivation, and then finally we have the structure itself. Wildstar is one of my favorite MMORPGs of all time. It's got fantastic combat, it's got fantastic encounters, but there's one problem I have with Wildstar, and it's a problem that seems to crop up in a number of places, mostly in the leveling, but also in the endgame in some cases. Wildstar lacks a lot of player agency. Outside of the first few starting zones, Wildstar's leveling content progresses along a very linear path through a very linear set of zones. You can do dungeons, adventures, and expeditions to get this experience points as well as PvPing will level you up, but your options on leveling up through these side passages are often a little bit narrow. You can go back to Storm Talon at level 40, it's not going to be as valuable to you, and sadly, at level 40 you might be stuck with Skullcano, which I still have nightmares about Mordecai. Let's contrast this with another concept. Guild Wars 2 has got almost an infinite amount of agency. In fact, you can go to basically any zone, so long as it's not drastically above your level, and have no real problems leveling there. You can even go to past zones and you'll still be getting equivalent experience. You can go do dungeons, you can do PvP. There are a lot of options on every front in Guild Wars 2 for how you progress your character. There's an incredible amount of player agency. So much agency, in fact, that I lose direction when it comes to Guild Wars 2 and I wind up fading away from the game. So Wildstar's got not enough agency, which makes you feel really restricted in how you're playing your character, which can make the leveling process and even the endgame gearing processes feel incredibly tight and sometimes boring, while Guild Wars 2 gives you too much agency, so you can get lost in the game at some points. There are some happy mediums out there, though. Games like Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft take the structure you'd normally associate with kind of questing through zones and following linear storylines, but allow you a lot of room to do other things. There are a lot of dungeons to choose from in World of Warcraft, and in Final Fantasy XIV, you can even go back to previous dungeons through a roulette system, which allows you to gain equivalent amounts of experience based on your current level. Even if that dungeon is 30 levels below you, you still have a reason to go there, so it still is an option for a way for you to progress through the content. So at the end of the day here, agency requires something of a deft touch, I guess. You need to make sure that you're not getting people lost in your games, although some people like to be able to get lost, while you still want to give people room to move, though there are some people who prefer a linear, straight-line leveling. I guess it all depends on the kind of game you're trying to make, but I think there is a Goldilocks zone when it comes to agency in content progression, and it affects all sorts of different types of content. I, for one, prefer a lot of agency in raiding content, though not a huge amount. I like to have options on what kind of raids I want to tackle on a certain night. For example, in Burning Crusade, once you get past Karazhan, you've got two options. You can go to Gruul's Lair, you can go to Magtheridon's Lair. You can tackle SSC or TK. There are some difficulty differences between the two, but they're both within the same kind of realm of challenge. So you've got some options on what you want to do. Whereas looking at more modern World of Warcraft, you wind up getting stuck in the same raid for literally months. Even if you're progressing through different difficulties and getting better loot from it, it is still essentially the same raid. Which, as much as the challenge is increasing, you're fighting the same bosses. You might have one or two new mechanics on Mythic mode, and it's got a structured raid there, but at the same time, you're fighting the same bosses, the same encounters at their core. And that can be boring. Like Mass Effect, player choice can be pointless. You could be progressing through the same content, but that player choice gives you the feeling of power and agency over what you're doing. Very few games with player choice actually utilize that player choice. So why is player choice there in the first place then? Well, because it feels good to make a choice. Even if that choice is ultimately meaningless, choosing different dialogue options in Final Fantasy XIV's main quests, or choosing different dialogue options in a Telltale game, they both feel good to do because you feel like you're in control of the events. It allows you to sink into what's happening and be engaged by it. That's why agency is such a powerful force in MMORPGs, and I believe that this whole one dungeon, one tier deal that World of Warcraft has been doing lately is incredibly detrimental. Even if you're going to focus on one tier of content, don't just leave us with one thing to do. Even if it's got multiple difficulties, I'm sorry. It's still the same dungeon, and it sucks to be stuck in the same dungeon for 2 months, 3 months, raiding nothing but that. Even if it's a palette swap to another color and has a couple of different bosses, feels a lot better than sitting in the same stuffy ogre city for 2 months waiting for Blackrock Foundry to unlock. That was a little bit of a rant. I don't know where that came from. Moving on! So when I was like 12 years old, maybe, tops, I had a copy of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, like the whole clicking cartridge that worked together. And it's the last Sonic game I ever owned, and I'm really kind of stoked about that because apparently the blue blur has kind of gone downhill over the years. But I owned a copy of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and when I played this game, I loved it. But when I was super young, I could never really get past the second or third stage. I would always get stuck on like the airship zone in Sonic and Knuckles, or Hydro City, or Marble Gardens in Sonic 3, and I really couldn't get past that. And it's because I sucked when I was young. I was not very good at video games back then. But one day, I was sitting there, bored, and I had plugged in the game, and I had turned it on, and I watched the demo, and I saw a demo of Sandopolis Zone. It's the third level in Sonic & Knuckles. And I was a tiny little child creature at the time, and this blew my goddamn mind. I saw this and I was like, holy crap, I want to get there. It's like an Egypt-themed desert zone. That looks so cool, I can't wait to do it. And less than a day later, I had beaten Sonic & Knuckles. Yeah, I get it. It's not as inspirational a story as some guy who went mountain climbing and harnessed the power of motivation to cut off his own arm. But shut up, it works. Another interesting little example of this in action. Back in Burning Crusade, I was watching the Sunwell Plateau footage as it was coming out. I was still back in SSC and TK at the time. I hadn't really progressed that far. I wasn't even close to Sunwell. But I saw the boss Maru, who is a Dark Naru. And I thought, holy shit, I want to fight that. I never did, but the point is I was super duper motivated, and I pushed harder than I ever did before I saw that. That's the power of motivation. I've talked about motivation at length before in another video where I discussed the concept of goal setting theory. It's an actual theory in business settings where people are most effective when they have specific and challenging goals. And I think progression arcs can provide specific and challenging goals. A good progression system can show you the path to the thing you want. It can lay out the roadmap and say, go get it, go take it. And that draws more motivation out of me, at least, I don't know about you, than really anything else. If there's something I want, I will work my ass off for it. Just ask Saren Prime. And I guess that leaves us with structure. Structure of progression is how challenges are arrayed against the player to make them most effective, to make them most thematic, to make them work the best, however the game wants them to work. And when it comes down to structure, I'm a big fan of the triangle. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, I'm sorry. Let me break that down into something that makes at least a little bit of sense. When I envision how a raid structure should be, a lot of people probably think of a flowchart, but I like to think that the best raid structures are triangular. Now, why do I say this? Well, at the bottom of the raid structure, or progression structure, or whatever, you should be given a lot of non-specific means to progress. This can be dungeons, crafting, reputation factions, experience gains, all sorts of means to progress your character upwards, though none of them terribly deep or focused. As you move up through the progression chain, your focus should become more narrow with other more optional items opening up on the sides of you. Say the Dragon Maw would be a great example of an optional item as you increase your power in raiding. By the time you reach the very top end of raiding, this could be Mythic raiding, this could be Red Moon Terror, the only real ways to advance your character come from those top tier activities. There's not really much else outside of that that'll give you upgrades or improve your character in any way. The content has slowly funneled you upwards towards the cutting edge, the absolute top. This content is extremely focused and extremely deep. It takes a long time to conquer. That's why it's devoted so much attention. That's why it is the primary form of advancement. In Final Fantasy XIV, Savage Raids may be the only way for you to get upgrades. Not even your relic weapons will reach that power, the power that you're getting from, say, Alexander Savage Midas. To use an example that touches on something else, even crafting recipes that would supplement your ability to get gear at this level come from that raid. They're drops from ambient monsters. At this level, it takes a lot of work and dedication to make any progress at all, as it should, because the progress rewards are the best, the absolute top tier here. There should, though, be other optional things outside of this to do. Things like farming up reputations to receive special mounts or titles, seasonal events, crafting, all sorts of crazy stuff like that, to make sure that you're not burnt out, because the worst thing you can do in an MMORPG is log in just to raid. Under this ethos, you slowly lose agency when you get to these high levels, but that agency might come in other forms, like non-linear dungeons or something along those lines. But the challenge presented at this high level and the rewards presented at this high level must be extreme, to justify the fact that it is the only avenue of progression left available to the player. A great example of this would be in Burning Crusade Endgame. You start out in basic dungeons, you eventually move up to something like Karazhan with some lower level heroics. As you progress through those, you might enter Grol's Lair and Magtheridon's Lair, entering into harder, higher level heroics until you're at SSC and TK. At this point, you might find yourself ditching heroics altogether. SSC loot is substantially better than that. Why would you bother going back? As these raids become the whole world, you eventually move into Hyjal, Black Temple, and finally Sunwell Plateau, where the only upgrades you're getting are from these incredibly high-level instances. Now, there are two concepts that tend to come up when we talk about MMORPG progression, and I like to think that the triangle incorporates both of them in an interesting way. Horizontal progression, or how you can progress on the same level through a variety of different means, or vertical progression, also known as how you progress upwards and improve your character. These two concepts are pretty important when deciding how you want an MMO to play. Games with a lot of vertical progression, games like Wildstar, will take a long time to progress through, but can be extremely rewarding, while games with a lot of horizontal progression, games like Black Desert Online or Guild Wars 2, will have a lot of agency associated with them. They'll feel good, you can make a lot of choices. At the end of the day, the more challenging your content becomes, the more focused it'll likely become. And as you move up that chain, you're likely going to be coming into more focused content in most MMORPGs. And almost every game I've experienced has had this happen. As you move up further through the content chain, there is less and less content that actually progresses you forward. It all comes down to how you want your game to play. Games with a lot of agency may be flatter and wider and have more to do, but less layers to progress through, while games with a lot of structured linear content may have a ton of stuff to do and a long chain to do it, but you're pretty restricted in how you do it. I find the most fun comes out of MMORPGs that balance the two well, that kind of create a right triangle, if you would. But no matter what they look like, they should provide a number of things. They should provide clear and specific goals in order to motivate you forward. They should provide ramping difficulty, and I'm talking about real difficulty. I'm not just talking about numbers here. They should be actually more challenging than the previous dungeon. I'm not a big fan of this whole High Mall is just as easy as Hellfire Citadel thing that goes on in Warlords of Draenor, but I have a lot of issues with how raiding is in WoW these days that I think I'll talk about in a different video that's a little bit less, not a rant. And finally, it should be clearly laid out. Nothing sucks more than not knowing what to do, so having a clear path through progression, something similar to what Final Fantasy XIV has, with basically just telling you what to do through its main story quests, is actually not a bad thing. Yes, Final Fantasy's main story quests can be infuriating at times, especially considering I almost have a level 60 White Mage, but won't be able to raid for probably a couple more weeks because I need to do about 120 quests. But it can also be very effective at guiding you through things, and being guided through progression and knowing how the progression cycle works and what you should be striving for is incredibly important. So at the end of the day, progression is a very interesting thing. It encapsulates a lot of essential parts of an MMORPG in the modern world. Progressing forward through something is almost as important as progressing your character, because as Skyforge has taught us, just having character progression and a bunch of meaningless instances that you just repeat ad nauseum on different difficulties, boring. It's kind of boring, I'm sorry. I love your character advancement system, but God, is that boring. Progressing through an MMORPG is fun. It's incredibly fun. For people like me, it's like the whole point. The more fun I can have just pushing forward through an MMO, the more cool stuff I can discover, the more badass bosses I can kill, the happier I am with my $15 a month and or random microtransactions. And I would love to see this formula messed with. I'd love to see new ideas come out when it comes to progression. Maybe games with entirely separate progression tracks. Maybe games that are nothing but a single incredibly dense progression track, all the way from start to finish. Who knows? There's a lot of innovation in MMOs, especially with the rise of the Kickstarter MMO happening now. More and more independent developers are able to get in on the genre. What was once dying is now being reborn in the ashes of crowdfunding, and that means innovation. And hopefully, those most important aspects of MMORPGs, progression, both character and content, will be the things innovated upon most. Because I honestly believe that they are the most important parts. Hey there, everybody. Thank you for watching the second half of progression in MMORPGs with a focus on content progression. I guess you kind of know that because that's the video you just watched. Sorry this one took a little while to get done. I've kind of been swamped with a bunch of things lately, but that's over. I'm going to be back to a more regular schedule moving forward, so hopefully you guys are stoked about that. I know I am. But thank you again for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. It's a huge support to the channel. Helps that YouTube algorithm bullcrap find more people. I don't know how that stupid thing works. But thank you very much for watching once again, and you all continue to have a great one.